tonight's program are really made possible by your gifts and your membership dues, which directly fund museum programs and exhibitions. So we are so excited that there were so many generous donors who helped make this exhibition possible. And we hope that, we know that some of them have visited tonight and some of them may be on the Zoom as well. So on behalf of the South Dakota Art Museum and our parent organization, South Dakota State University, thank you so much to all of you for your support. So we're going to start tonight's program with a short video that South Dakota Public Broadcasting created for the exhibition. So those who are on the Zoom have a chance to really see the exhibition. And then following the video, Taylor McKeown, curator of collection, will introduce tonight's panel. So Taylor started with us as a student intern in 2016 and has since been promoted in 2018 to curator of collection. And he will introduce the rest of our panel. But for now, we will roll with that video. So let's go ahead and get started with that.
Harvey Dunn is legendary in life and in art for sure. As you know, a teacher, war artist, there are letters home from other illustrators that were there as war artists talking about how jealous they were of Harvey Dunn going over the top of the trenches to capture the scenes. His early life experience as the son of a homesteader, his dad would basically test potential farmhands against Harvey Dunn because he could carry more sacks of wheat. He was a huge man. You know, everything he did as a teacher, as a war artist, as an illustrator, as the son of a homesteader, there are these stories about how amazed people were about his capabilities and what he was able to achieve. So he really is, beyond just how amazing his artwork is, he's become this almost mythological feature for South Dakotans. So a lot of people really love him for his prairie paintings, and that's probably the most substantial portion of our collection, and that's hung all together on one long wall. Then we also have a selection of his illustrations, which is probably our next largest body of works from him. So when he did this initial show in South Dakota, he had never shown in the state. In 1950, he was invited to come and show. They put it up at the Masonic Lodge in DeSmet because there really weren't exhibition spaces. And at the time they thought, oh, we'll put this up for a couple weeks, people appreciate it. The show itself was so popular with South Dakota and thousands of people coming in that they kept it up all summer. So just by that fact that they thought, oh, we'll do this show, people think it's neat, we'll have it up for a couple weeks. They had no idea how much people wanted to see his work, how much people loved his work here. But he was so moved by that, by so many people coming out. That's why we have this collection now, because it was because of that exhibition that he donated the nearly 40 works in that show to the people of South Dakota and made South Dakota State University as the caretaker of it. Now it's grown to 145 pieces. Around 1925, he actually started making regular visits back to South Dakota. And so we can trace a lot of his prairie paintings that are so beloved by people from these visits to the state from 1925 to 50. A lot of those works were made during that period. But he focused on it for his own artistic expression more later in life. And those were pieces that I think are the height of what he created because they weren't commissioned work. He wasn't creating a painting to tell a story that was given to him to illustrate. He painted them strictly from his heart, for his love of this place and from his memories of this place and his experiences with people here. I think he was painting them because he was compelled to paint them as an artist. Both in his own work and what he was taught from Howard Pyle, what he taught his students, was that illustration, making art, isn't just about depicting this physical reality that you see. His drive with every work he made was to capture the spirit of that subject matter. It's really the drama, the human drama that's coming out in the pieces. And I think that's why his work is so impactful, because he's not painting a scene or an idea, he's painting human drama. And whether it's a war work or an illustration or a prairie painting, that is always his foundational goal, and that's, I think, what makes his work so powerful. Harvey Dunn does speak to a lot of the students that come here to school. So we see them spend a lot of time looking at the pieces and appreciating it, but never enough. Not everybody on campus knows it. So I think it is especially as an art student, the range of what we have, and this exhibition itself showing off the range of what he did is a great learning tool. And we'd love more and more folks to come out and appreciate that and come see it. Harvey Dunn is legendary in life and in art for sure. As you know, a teacher, war artist, there are letters home from other illustrators that were there as war artists talking about how jealous they were of Harvey Dunn going over the top of the trenches to capture the scenes. His early life experience as the son of a homesteader, his dad would basically test potential farmhands against Harvey Dunn because he could carry more sacks of wheat. He was a huge man. You know, everything he did as a teacher, as a war artist, as an illustrator, as the son of a homesteader, there are these stories about how amazed people were about his capabilities and what he was able to achieve. So he really is, beyond just how amazing his artwork is, he's become this almost mythological feature for South Dakotans. So a lot of people really love him for his prairie paintings, and that's probably the most substantial portion of our collection, and that's hung all together on one long wall. Then we also have a selection of his illustrations, which is probably our next largest body of works from him. So when he did this initial show in South Dakota, he had never shown in the state. In 1950, he was invited to come and show. They put it up at the Masonic Lodge in DeSmet because there really weren't exhibition spaces. And at the time they thought, oh, we'll put this up for a couple weeks, people appreciate it. The show itself was so popular with South Dakota and thousands of people coming in that they kept it up all summer. So just by that fact that they thought, oh, we'll do this show, people think it's neat, we'll have it up for a couple weeks. They had no idea how much people wanted to see his work, how much people loved his work here. But he was so moved by that, by so many people coming out. That's why we have this collection now, because it was because of that exhibition that he donated the nearly 40 works in that show to the people of South Dakota and made South Dakota State University as the caretaker of it. Now it's grown to 145 pieces. Around 1925, he actually started making regular visits back to South Dakota. And so we can trace a lot of his prairie paintings that are so beloved by people from these visits to the state from 1925 to 50. A lot of those works were made during that period. But he focused on it for his own artistic expression more later in life. And those were pieces that I think are the height of what he created because they weren't commissioned work. He wasn't creating a painting to tell a story that was given to him to illustrate. He painted them strictly from his heart, for his love of this place and from his memories of this place and his experiences with people here. I think he was painting them because he was compelled to paint them as an artist. Both in his own work and what he was taught from Howard Pyle, what he taught his students, was that illustration, making art, isn't just about depicting this physical reality that you see. His drive with every work he made was to capture the spirit of that subject matter. It's really the drama, the human drama that's coming out in the pieces. And I think that's why his work is so impactful, because he's not painting a scene or an idea, he's painting human drama. And whether it's a war work or an illustration or a prairie painting, that is always his foundational goal. And that's, I think, what makes his work so powerful. Harvey Dunn does speak to a lot of the students that come here to school. So we see them spend a lot of time looking at the pieces and appreciating it, but never enough. Not everybody on campus knows it. So I think it is especially as an art student, the range of what we have, and this exhibition itself showing off the range of what he did is a great learning tool. And we'd love more and more folks to come out and appreciate that and come see it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Taylor McKeown, the curator of collections at the South Dakota Art Museum, and welcome to tonight's program. We're so glad that you're you're joining us. We'll have about 30 minutes for our panel to discuss, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions at the end. Zoom participants, you can submit questions in the chat, and anybody attending in person, you'll have the opportunity to ask some questions too. So I hope that video gave you a little glimpse of some of the Dunn pieces in the collection and the exhibit for those that haven't been able to visit us in person. We're so excited to have a wonderful panel of 3 individuals who have worked closely with Harvey Dunn's work, and we'll discuss his legacy in South Dakota and beyond. John Rychtarik is an artist and curator living in South Dakota in Brookings, who worked as curator of exhibits at the South Dakota Art Museum from 2001 to 2013. He continues to be a valued volunteer here at the museum and serves as our guild's vice president. Jodi Lundgren has been curator of exhibitions since John's retirement in 2013. She curated the first Dunn Complete Collection show in 2014 and curated its current iteration in celebration of the museum's 50th anniversary. And finally, Elizabeth Alberding joins us from Hagerstown, Maryland. She has been curator of the Kelly Collection of American Illustration for 26 years. Did I get that right? The Kelly Collection is a private collection dedicated to the acquisition, preservation, research, and exhibition of Golden Age American illustration, including 26 works by Harvey Dunn. The Kelly Collection has collaborated with us on exhibitions, and they recently donated our most recent Dunn acquisition, a beautiful nude, which is in our recent acquisition show, which is on display through October 24th. So welcome, John, Jodi, and Elizabeth. Jodi, I kind of wanted to start this off with you. And
you already did.
What's that?
You already did.
I already did, yeah. You said all you need to say.
I'm done.
So. We always have more to talk about with Dunn. So it's been 6 years. It had been 6 years since we last did the Complete Collection show. Can you share why you decided to curate another showing of the Complete Collection?
Yeah.
And maybe some visitor reactions.
Sure. When we did that first show, I love to tell this story because it was I just thought I needed to see all these pieces together. So there was really a selfish motivation. I was so new as a curator here. And I'm trying to look at all the works, mostly through images, because we already, we had hundreds of, over 100 pieces by then. Looking at images, trying to pull out screens and storage and look at them. And I just thought, I need to see these all together, and thought, oh, I think it'd be really cool to hang them all in one show so I can look at them all together finally and really see those connections. And thought, I think some people think that's kind of neat too. But as soon as we got that up, it was such a grassroots enthusiasm for it. We almost immediately knew that this was something really special. People were really excited about, and we were going to have to do it again. At that time, we didn't know, when we might do it again, but I think we pretty early on thought this is something that could be brought back and done again. And so I really was already looking at the exhibition schedule and thinking about when we could do it then during that first showing, and just kind of decided, waiting at least 5 years was going to give it some time for people. You don't want to. There's such an impact with it. You don't want to do it too often. You kind of want to tease people and make them come back and expect it. And then the 20th anniversary was just the perfect time to line it up to do it again. Make sure we had some crossover the summer. The pandemic was definitely an interruption, but I think we found a way to stretch it out with enough time where we're open that hopefully it hit a lot of people. And, now when we do it again in another at least 5+ years, if people couldn't catch it this time, hopefully they can make it then too. So it was what I really took away from that too, besides getting to absorb his work as a curator and figure out, really see them all together and think about what I could do with that collection, was that kind of response that people had for that really made me understand more so that original showing. because again, it was so unexpected. I was really, just as a human phenomenon, to have people so excited and come out and you don't realize, and to see them ignited about art like that. I really got that so much more, like what that must have felt like for people to be just coming out to see this guy, and they connect to the work, you know, especially folks in the state connect to it, not just as art enthusiasts. A lot aren't are art enthusiasts, but to see just average people come and want to come out to see art and get so much out of it is just really so rewarding and eye-opening for me, for sure.
Elizabeth, you're joining us from way out east, but you've visited us a couple times, right?
Yes, yes, I've been out a couple times.
You know, I think South Dakotans primarily know Dunn as a painter of the homesteading era, but he was best known during his lifetime as an illustrator. Can you share when you first encountered Dunn's work and how he fits into the golden age of American illustration?
Well,
Big question.
26, okay. 26 years ago, when I joined the Kelly Collection, I knew absolutely nothing about American illustration or Harvey Dunn for that matter. And at the time, the collection was such that it was Howard Pyle and his students. And that's kind of how I began to recognize Dunn, is as a student of Pyle's. And then I did an exhibition at in Delaware at the Newark Museum. I think it was Newark. I forget. No, the Biggs, excuse me. It was the Biggs Museum. And it was Harvey Dunn, teacher, illustrator, and painter. And I just began to throw myself into his work because he was the largest part of the Kelly collection at the time. We have 26 pieces now. We used to have 27, but
Thank you.
But and you never know when we're going to find another one. So anyway, as an illustrator, it was a way to reach other people who were not from South Dakota. It was a way to make money, to support his family, his wife, send money home to South Dakota to his parents. Everything he learned from the things he saw in South Dakota, his skies, the way people's faces, bodies, you can see all of that directly reflected in his illustrations. Even though they are not, you know, they are pictures of people in Renaissance dress or people in, you know, Revolutionary Wars, you can still see the influence of South Dakota in his images. So whether he was, you know, an illustrator of South Dakota for all times, I would say yes, you know. And if he were still alive, he and I would be having an affair. You know, that's how much I love Harvey Dunn and I love his work. So
he's lovable. We refer to him fondly as Harvey around the museum. We're on a first name basis with him. Of course. And John, you're a native South Dakotan who worked in the state for decades as an educator and then as a museum professional, often working with Dunn's history and his imagery. Why do you think Dunn remains so relevant to South Dakotans and continues to draw our visitors every year?
Well, my first experience with Harvey Dunn, I'm not sure how I heard about him, but I was going to college up at Northern in Alberding. And one time, some friends and I took a trip down to Brookings, and we had to stop in and see the Harvey Dunn paintings that were then in the Student Union. And they were hung up high and with all the student activity and the cigarette smoke and all this type of thing. It was, but we had to stop and see his work, and I was very impressed with it. And I think that's the way people of South Dakota are really proud of the work that he's done. And what leads the people of South Dakota really to come in is to see the prairie work. You know, the Prairie is My Garden, of course, is the probably the most well-known. But I think one thing's great about an exhibit like this, which I think, you know, Jodi did a wonderful job of exhibiting all the Dunns, that people are attracted to come in to see his prairie work, but then they, you know, see all of these other wonderful works of art that he created. And to me, they're all illustrations of life. And, you know, there was this mix of, you know, well, illustration or an artwork, you know, and all this. This is all art. This is all illustration of life. And that's what I think people are, you know, interested in. And I think a lot of it is Laurel Ingalls Wilder also helped portray the prairie, and people, you know, children of all ages have, you know, read the books and so on, and it's nostalgic as well to see what, you know, a glimpse of life back in the days when Harvey was a child near De Smet. And so I think that really is what attracts the people, you know, of South Dakota and the local people, as well as people from other places, because the message of the prairie has gotten out, you know, all over.
Yeah, and those, I wanted to talk about the prairie paintings kind of as a series, and what your guys' understanding of, we now refer to them as the prairie paintings. Did Dunn set out to create that series? How did that develop? Could you share that?
Are you talking to me?
No, to all three.
All of us.
Opened up.
Oh, okay.
I love that the you know, the quote in the book where he says, and I won't get this exact, but that how he preferred painting the prairie paintings to anything else. And then the great line about how his search for other horizons led him back around to his first. Now, how they came to be, I mean, my understanding is that you know, we've got works in the collection even from very early in his illustration career where he was, you could call it a prairie painting. So he was known, you know, he was known for having grown up here, being the homesteader. And when he had that kind of thing in his background, I think he was sought out as an illustrator for those types of stories and scenes throughout his career. And so there's not like all of a sudden he started painting these types of scenes. It really does, I think, cover the whole gamut of his career. But I think when, you know, Aubrey invited him to start, Aubrey Sherwood, the De Smet newspaper man, invited him to the Old Settlers days in 1925, and he started making those regular treks back. You just kind of have to assume that had a big impact on him. You know, and we know he wasn't necessarily making completed finished paintings here on those visits. He was doing a lot of sketches, but, you know, he was a studio artist. He'd go back and start making those. And so I think he probably had the freedom to kind of do what he wanted later on too, and was teaching more. And so I think when I look at like the dates of a lot of those works in our collection, they do tend to be kind of that later 25 to 50, but they were present all along. So there was something pulling on him. But, you know, he was both doing it commercially, but something kind of pulling on his heart to keep readdressing that time period and where he came from. But John and Elizabeth, tell me if I'm completely wrong on all of that.
No, I go ahead, John.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
No, I agree with you completely. If you look at the images that he did for Outing magazine, those were all homesteader paintings, farming paintings. They were very much part of what he knew. If you look even at his early work, or his war work for that matter, you know, even the images there, although they are somewhat horrific, they still echo the facial features and the coloring that he was using when he was painting his prairie paintings. Of course, you know, his war paintings were mainly done on these huge rolls of paper, you know, where he sketched and then he took them back, and it wasn't until much later that he got to paint them on canvas. I mean, he wasn't painting in the trenches. He was he was sketching on the run, quite literally. You know, as he's going over with his bayonet in one hand and his pencil in the other and sketching as he goes. He was a little crazy. But you know, what the heck, right? So I think that a lot of the work that he did as an illustrator and as a teacher later really was through the love of painting his beloved prairies. I mean, he was painting love, and you know, he would go around and he would, you know, do his illustration jobs and his work for teaching. But when he needed to be centered or to focus on things, he would work on a prairie painting. So, you know, I think that not only did he have an absolute undying love for the prairie paintings and the people of South Dakota and the images and the colors and the textures, I think he used it as a grounding mechanism to keep him centered while he was doing all of his other work. I could be wrong, but I don't think so.
Well, I don't really have any more to say. I think that was said really well, that, you know, his love of the prairie and that kept him grounded and that sort of thing. I think it couldn't be said any better.
Right? Isn't there also the line about Tula wishing he would be sipping tea in fine china and like that not being his thing? He just was
wearing a beret in Paris,
a South Dakotan homesteader, you know?
Well, we're having trouble getting to you. I hope you can hear me. We have lost connections, and we just wanted to show you the 3 pictures that we have of feeding the calves. That he's been my father-in-law, and this is the picture of feeding the calves. And then Evan took another picture of breaking plow that we have in our home here. And then
I like that one.
Yeah, and then we have milking time, and our son has another, and our daughter has another, and we've all loved it, and they all call him Papa Ed. The garden is.
I love
Taylor,
that.
introduce.
I should introduce you here.
Yeah.
We have special guests on the call tonight. This is Betty Sarang, whose father-in-law, Ed Sarang, was Harvey Dunn's roommate when he was a student in Brookings, 1901 to 1902. And I believe you can correct me if I have this story wrong at all. I believe they stayed in contact, and your father-in-law later worked in Chicago and purchased a number of prairie paintings because they both, of course, were native South Dakotans. And
they were roommates.
Right, sure. And Ed Sarang donated The Prairie is My Garden to SDSU the same year that Dunn donated his work to SDSU. And of course, we refer to it as the Mona Lisa of South Dakota. It's,
Well, are you closing that gallery? Is that what this is about?
yeah, so this is our closing reception. We close the exhibit next Sunday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But we've loved these paintings and think of Papa Ed all the time, and everybody and our friends that see them remark on how beautiful they are.
Could you show us the first painting that
Yes,
you showed? Because I didn't see it. I don't know if anyone.
there it is.
Yeah, so these are works that are in their
Evan.
personal collection that
The
were
first-
purchased
no,
from Dunn.
Evan, the first one. There you go. No,
Oh, yes.
yeah,
Nice.
that's milking.
Wonderful.
Beautiful.
Or feeding the calves.
Feeding the
Pretty
cows.
calves.
Mhm.
Would you like to see those again?
Thank you.
Yes,
They're wonderful works, and thank
Yes.
you still to the family for the Prairie is My Garden. That piece has
yes.
become such a, we can't take the Prairie is My Garden down. It will be in every show because so many people complained to Pam up in our museum store that she's threatened to quit. So we always have that painting out on
But
display.
I have to
Has to
admit,
be.
I took it down. We thought it needed rest. And people got really upset. And Pam is the first person that people see when they come to the museum. And so after that, we worked it into every exhibit. So, or else
French Impressionism and
one
My
lady
Prairie is My Garden.
One lady said, "What if I would go over to the Louvre and the Mona Lisa was down?"
There you go.
So they compared it to the Mona Lisa.
The Mona Lisa of the Prairie,
Yes.
for
It
sure.
is.
And thank you so much for sharing those.
Well, we're in and out of the Zoom, so that's why we thought we'd just interrupt and show you what we have here.
Thank
Sorry
you.
about the computer breakdown. We just went off the air completely.
Technology is great when it
It
cooperates
took
with
us
us.
20 minutes to
Yes.
start all over again.
Well, I also wanted to ask you three about Dunn's process, how he worked, and the volume of work that he created. So I'll just throw that out, and I'd love to hear about Dunn's process.
One of the interesting stories that I told Taylor the other day was that Harvey Dunn was very prolific, especially during his illustration career. He was painting them as fast as they would hire him. And he was very popular. And he also had a lot of students. He was working at the Grand Central and he also had a school in New Jersey with Mr. Chambers. And so he was very busy. And one of the things that he would do is, or would not do, which is, the one thing that if he were still here, I would have words with him about, is that he would never varnish the top of his paintings, especially his illustrations, because he knew that they were works for hire and that for him, once they were published, they had no intrinsic value left. The only ones that had intrinsic value to him were his easel paintings, things he had done for other people. So what would happen is he would paint, and then when he was done and it was published, he'd flip it over and he'd start painting again. But there's no varnish level between them. So you can't remove the top level without removing all the other paintings below it. And then, he was very frugal. And when paintings got to be too thick on his canvases, he would take them out into the backyard, throw some dishwashing detergent on them, usually Ivory or Palmolive, and he would hose off his, everybody's going, would hose off his paintings and scrub them down, let the canvas dry, and reuse them. Or he would cut them into a different size if he needed a smaller piece of canvas for a student. He would flip them over. He would restretch with the old painting facing the stretcher, and he would paint on the back. So he worked quickly. He worked very thickly. If you'll notice a lot of the impasto on his work, he started with small brushes when he was a student with Pyle, because Pyle believed in almost a photorealism. And so it was a very fine work. Eventually, after Pyle passes away and Harvey Dunn begins to teach the second generation of illustrators, thank you, Kitty. He would then begin to use large brushes and palette knives because he had such huge hands that it was much more comfortable for him. And he was moving so quickly and using such thick paint. And sometimes he would let his paintings dry before he brought them into New York to the publisher. Sometimes he wouldn't. It depended on, how busy he was that day.
Yeah. Well, our paintings we took to the Portland Art Museum to have them cleaned, and they protected them and cleaned them, and they're wonderful.
Good, good, good.
One thing
It's a heavy paint.
about his work, and if you look closely, you can see that some of the thicknesses of paint does not really match the subject matter of the painting. And like Elizabeth said, many times he painted over his paintings. And some of his illustrations, he must not have thought all that much of those illustrations, didn't value them. And so he painted over them. And I think one of the best collections within the Dunn collection at the South Dakota Art Museum are his portraits of old men. And those we discovered through X-ray that they were painted over illustrations. And and to me, I think there's some of the nice paintings. Of course, I love all his work, but and so I think the illustrations that he kept may have donated, some of them donated to the college, were probably some that he liked, rather than some that he decided to paint over or discard in some way. And there, you look at some of the paintings, at some of the canvases, and that sometimes he painted over the canvas several times. I think there's one landscape, fall landscape, I think it is, or something. There's evidence on the back that there were several illustrations on that one canvas. So he was fugal, like you say, and some things back then with the illustrations, the main thing was getting it in the rag, rather, than the finished painting itself, which is really, it's unthinkable, really, right now, of all the efforts and work that went into his paintings.
John mentioned his love for the portraits, and I'm curious, each of you, is there a certain series that's a favorite of the prairie? Jodi, what do we have? Portraits, prairie paintings, illustrations, war works,
Nudes,
and a nude wall kind of tucked around the corner for.
Yes, the naughty nude wall.
Yeah.
No, don't ask me that. It's like asking to choose amongst my children, compare apples and oranges. There are so many wonderful works, and there's at least one from each of those bodies, and many more that are just wonderful. I can't decide between them. They all have their own power that I wouldn't place any above other. They're interesting for their differences and the differences of the purposes. And but yeah, I won't choose amongst my children.
Understandable. I can never pick one either.
I do always want people to, because some people are very much like, they're in it for the illustrations, they're in it for the prairie paintings because they connect, and I always want them to find the value in these other bodies that he's created, and see how much more in them that I can find in them.
Yeah, and how they relate to one another.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was thinking over, I've been at the museum the last 5 years, and in those 5 years, so in 2016, when I first started here, there was this great traveling exhibition, Masters of the Golden Age, Harvey Dunn and his students, which, tell me if I'm wrong, it was at Brookings, at the Norman Rockwell Museum, and at the Hunter, right? And in 2017, we reprinted Dunn's biography by Robert Carroll-Evans. We've covered so much territory with Dunn. What do you still want to learn? What questions do we still have about Dunn?
I think personal questions. I mean, the man, you get to learn a lot of him through his artwork. However, he had a very interesting life in his work with his students, with his the people of his era, for instance, N.C. Wyeth, and know more kind of. I always want to know a little bit more about the man himself, and like for instance, the Arthur Mitchell Museum in Trinidad has Arthur Mitchell was a student of Dunn and a great friend, and like Harvey Dunn and his cronies would go to Trinidad, and I think they painted and they partied and had a great time. And so that museum there has several Harvey Dunn paintings, and and plus they have letters that Harvey wrote to Arthur Mitchell, and that we found out a lot about him and about when he painted the old men, about how sick he was when his exhibit was at the Smith, things like that, that really personalize the man as a human being.
Yeah, those letters are great. I wish we had so much more of his correspondence. I mean, his character's sense of humor and personality come across in those. Mm-hmm. I wish we had more things like that in our archives to explore for sure. I also am super curious, and if I had, didn't have to do all of the other work curating exhibitions, but man, I'd love to dig into what kind of evidence there is as to the influences of some key things like on his practice. So like I can, when you talk about jumping into somebody to trying to be them, to represent them, there's this like interesting sociological kind of parallel with how, there's a term Max Weber used, Verstehen, that like shifted sociological study. And there's these kind of similar, you have to be within the culture or within the society to really tell its story. And there's these interesting parallels, and I wonder what kind of philosophy or things he was reading or just news about developments and how that came into play in his works. The same thing, like we've found something about seeing the Van Gogh exhibit in the 30s and coming out of it saying, man, what a colorist, like what I wanted did that. I wish he had a diary, like I love it this much. And then you start to see that influence of Van Gogh's thick brush working, like how much did all of those things come into play? I mean, so many times you want to know that about artists and there's just nobody there writing it down. So I think it's like endless what I would love to know. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall across the whole 50 years to really grasp him. We just have the tip of the iceberg, we really just know the tip of the iceberg. And he's just endlessly, infinitely rich material to cover and use and show different angles of, as a curator. So, and that's from what we already know. There's so much more that we really don't know.
Does Ellen Wade have any of the letters between her grandpa and?
No, I don't have any letters.
You don't? No. Okay.
Yeah. If anybody has access to, so many people too don't think, oh, the museum would love this for the archives. We anything, any shred of it, we really, the more we take it all.
Because we have lots of Ed's letters. We'll take a look and see.
Yeah,
oh, that'd be great. Yeah. Yeah. And Elizabeth, is there anything Dunn related that you a big question you want answered? Leave you out here.
Well, does he love me?
I know he would.
I think I would like to know a little more about his relationship with his students. There's so many great stories that when Walt Reed used to come to the collection and he would spend 3 days and we would sit in front of the same painting and he would, break it down for me because he knew all those artists and he knew of them and but he would tell me all these great stories about, how Dunn would be painting away in his, working away in his studio, and there'd be a knock on the door and there'd be a student. And even if he had a deadline, he would stop what he was doing in order to train that second generation and to give whatever he could to those students, the critique, well, you need to do this or you need to do that. And, this is who you should talk to and you should go and look at this artist. And I would have loved to have been a student to be able to, get with him and say, what do I need to do to be, well, you, and I think that's what I would like to know. I want to know more about his relationships with his students and how he was able to, take his own work and subjugate that to the importance of his students' work.
Yeah, and don't you think that devotion to teaching sort of grew out of his love for his teachers, Ada Caldwell at SDSU, and especially Howard Pyle. His years there, I think he was so appreciative for that early training and that they both took him under their wing.
He would constantly reference Pyle in his lectures. The evening lecture that we have the notes from, he's talking about everything that he's learned from Ada Caldwell and Pyle, and just trying to pound it into these kids who as all college kids do, want to take the shortcut, want to learn the tricks, rather than knowing how to get to the heart of it and how to get to the meaning of the painting. Even though it's an illustration, it's something, you do for, Maxwell House coffee,
Right.
Where's, what do I have to get to the heart of that? But you do in order to.
Yeah, there was no other way with him. I mean,
no.
Right. It always, you had to be, the word he uses over and over again in those notes, the perfunctory, don't do anything thoughtlessly or pointlessly or carelessly. Don't be perfunctory. The human substance that, and talking about the universal brotherhood of man, that human drama, everything was important. The majesty of the simple things, like that's the great stuff. And to have been there, or to have, if we could have had videos of some class sessions to just even more really feel and understand it more. I mean, you get so much out of those notes from the classroom, but If you could have been
Enough.
there, if you could have watched him doing that and just the human relations happening around it would have been awesome.
Do you know, does he have any family with his wife?
Yeah, so Dunn had 2 children, a son and a daughter, and we're very fortunate that their children have donated quite a few works to the collection, especially over the past 15 years. The actors' portrait series John talked about, that came from the family. And I know Jodi and I both love a set of woodcuts that Dunn did. It seems like just a year or two, he was doing a lot of these woodcuts that are beautiful as illustrations for Evening in the Classroom. And we have a couple Christmas cards even.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I see we're coming up to 10 minutes before the hour. I want to give a chance for audience members to ask questions. So again, if you're on Zoom, feel free to drop questions in the chat, and then we can also open it up to people in the auditorium if there are any questions down the hall. Or unmute yourself if you're on Zoom.
Taylor, I have a comment. They're talking about my Aunt Ada Caldwell.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes, we have John Hawley from Albuquerque on the call, and he's the great nephew. Oh, so good to see you, John. John is the great nephew of Ada Caldwell, who was Dunn's first art teacher.
I first met Harvey through Aunt Ada, through a professor at Brookings, Everett White, a geology professor. This was about in 1974. I worked for the Soil Conservation Service. Then I was at Lubbock, Texas, and he said, "Well, you have to go to this museum because there's a picture of your aunt, your great aunt there." So I was only 8, I guess, when she passed away. And now I'm 89, and she would have been, I calculate, I think 152 last on the 28th of September. Anyway, here's a couple in my collection. I don't know, can you see these?
Oh, Caldwell's?
Nice Ada Caldwell. Yeah.
Beautiful.
And then this is one that just was boxed away. I've never seen it. It was sent to me, and I don't know where that lake is, but
Wow.
it was my mother had an older sister, Frances Caldwell Durland, who was born 1890. My mother was born in 1896, and we were more going out to Lincoln to visit where Ada and my grandfather, Howard Walter Caldwell, was teaching. Howard was born in 1853, so he was like a teenager when Ada came along in 1869. But my mother followed on in that tradition. This is something she did in 1949, when I was just about ready to get shipped out to Korea, but I didn't. And then later on in life, when cataracts got to her, I was stationed with the federal government down in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And this is, she kind of stuck to realism. And some of my favorite stuff of my mom is when she had cataracts. And so she saw through it like St. Paul saw through a glass darkly. My mother went on to the Art Institute of Chicago in 1920, I guess, and then went into the Chautauqua she taught art art on the Chautauqua circuit at various mining camps. And she passed on at 83 in the early 1980s. But anyway, so Taylor found me or something.
The Caldwells have quite the legacy in the arts then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. I like to think of Ada Caldwell as the matron saint of the arts in South Dakota, and Harvey's the patron saint.
Well,
Can you hear us okay?
No, it's down the hall, I said.
Now I can. Yeah, I think we
Okay.
have some questions down the hall.
Okay, so Elizabeth, you mentioned seeing similarities and features and other constancies throughout Dunn's work earlier and later. But there is also incredible diversity in his work, just in the application of paint, sometimes his use of line, even the development of form. So are those differences, which I think you really see in his illustrations, were those something that kind of occurred, as career changes, or was that something he kind of brought on as he was illustrating different stories? Like what were the major stimuli for those changes?
I think the majority of the changes that you'll see in his work come from influences from various people that he meets, along with the stories. You don't really want to use the same colors for a Revolutionary War as you're going to use for China, a story about China. They have two different color palettes. The stories require two different color palettes and two different styles. I think when he was influenced a lot in his early years with the style work of what he learned from Ada Caldwell, and then specifically in illustration what he learns from Howard Pyle. Once Howard Pyle passes away, and he gets over his heartbroken and he was very upset about Howard passing. He then begins to become looser, and he begins to develop his own style. It's as if the master's hand has been removed from his shoulder, and he begins to become a little looser, a little freer. I think when he goes to Europe during the First World War, and he's seeing all of what's going on there, that also begins to loosen him up. I think his experiences in the war, his fast sketching begins to really influence how he paints. What he sees, what the colors are, a lot of that, it's all, he tended to just, wherever he was sucking it all in, and he was using everything he saw and everything he knew. And, once again, he was trying to get to the truth of what the image was. And so the changes that you'll see in his work over time comes from age and ability, and just learning how to be comfortable in his own artistic skin.
Well, thank you. Do we have further questions from the audience?
Elizabeth, so can you speak to, because you're more of a specialist within illustration, the influence of the kinds of developments in color printing and reproduction, in the maybe late teens going into the 20s, because you kind of do see, and maybe it's just paralleling him again being freed from the teacher's hand on the shoulder and his vigorous brushwork, but you see more color come into his works too. And what's your sense of that relationship?
Yes. When when you first begin with the two color offset printing, you'll see a lot of his work will be blue and black, red and black, green and black. And the shadows and the grays are, mixtures of the primary color with the black. And you'll see that in a lot of his images. He'll go with two colors. But as printing becomes 4-color and then becomes photorealistic, he begins to really, I think, explore the depth of color. For example, in the early days, snow had one color, and it was white with maybe a little gray in it. Toward the end, or toward later in his career, snow begins to have pinks and blue and green and yellow, and his clouds. When I came up to lecture for the Dunn and Student Show, I drove, you fly into Sioux Falls, and you drive up. And as you're driving up, I had to pull over twice because I'm looking at this sky and I'm going, OMG, that's Harvey Dunn. And of course I pull over at DeSmet and I'm like, and I'm crying, and it was great, and I'm like, oh, I need to get up there because I've got to do this lecture, but I think you're exactly right. As things developed and he became more popular and more free in his work, he really began to plumb the depths and stretch the abilities of photorealistic reproduction.
Yeah, I mean, he really exploited. I mean, here's a new opportunity to do this, and man, did he dig into the texture and the colors and the rich range of what new printing could take advantage of and show finally.
Right. I mean, if you look at his early stuff, like for one piece, we have a gray piece that he did when he was still a student, and it's extremely flat in terms of texture. It's very, very two-dimensional. But yet when you look at the later work that we have in the collection, and even, at the Prairie is My Garden, I mean, when that was reproduced, that, was just glorious in how much he had really stretched the ability of reproduction.
Yeah.
And I think he really liked doing that. He really liked messing with the printers.
I think you can see how much he enjoyed. I mean, it becomes so much more painterly too, like that. He really was obviously, I think, having a lot of fun with what he could do.
A little more impressionistic. I mean, very
expressionistic too. Yeah, both.
But in his work.
That's why I'm so curious about seeing that Van Gogh show. That was around what, 1935, 6-ish, right, Taylor?
I think so.
I wonder how much impact that had on him.
It had to have tons. I mean, the Armory show, would have had an incredible impact on him. And, on all those, at every artistic movement, I think you can see gets sucked into, in little bits and pieces. I mean, he was not doing cubist work, but he was taking some of their ideas and using them in perspective and using them in how he formulated and how he created the relationship between the figures in his work.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's why all these pieces, you can see cultural things, intellectual things, visual developments, how he's just, again, soaking it in and then using it when it's the right thing to use at the time to, again, express the spirit of whatever it is he's trying to share, right? Yeah.
So true. So true.
Wonderful.
Right, John?
Yeah.
Right, John? Do you agree?
So I think that we do actually have a relative of Harvey Dunn with us tonight. I think his, is it great grandson?
Great.
It's
a bit.
Well, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I'm really sorry I couldn't be there in person. I really wanted to, but a certain global pandemic has not allowed that to happen. But it's nice to see you all. I know my grandmother also really enjoyed coming out there. I think that might have been for the last time you did all of Harvey's work, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, sure. So her show was right before, I think, we did that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us your lineage. Your mother is your
your 7 steps.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's on my mother's side. So my mother's then I think it's mother's. So Harvey.
Harvey.
Yeah. So it's I've been doing art all my life, and I've grown up around those paintings, and that and an evening in the classroom has been hugely influential to me. And I also wanted to mention, I think it was for the touring show, the Dunn and his students, that film was sort of unearthed and published with
Yes.
and I saw that recently, and couldn't believe the way Harvey Dunn stood so far back from the canvas. And I've done some oil painting, and I'm pretty fiddly in small works myself, and I gave that a try the other day. Stood way back and held my brush almost like you'd hold a rapier or maybe a magic wand. And it takes some getting used to, but suddenly you do get these brush strokes. I was getting these brush strokes that looked a little bit like his. And so that's definitely a road I'm gonna have to go down.
That
farther.
footage is so great. I wish there was just so much more of that out there. That's the stuff you're like, oh.
But from when it was, what a blessing that we have any, right?
Right, yeah.
I think you can view that on YouTube, isn't it? Meet Harvey Dunn, I believe, is the title of the video. It's a good 3 or 4 minute long clip of Dunn at work. So
now, who was your great grandmother?
My great grandmother was a Louise Rutherford.
Sure, Dunn's.
Okay.
And
so Diana was your
grandmother.
Oh, I love Diana. She was really enjoyed her when she came out and visited, and I was really fortunate to be able to put an exhibit together of her portraits along with Harvey's. It was really nice.
And we acquired one of those, her portrait of her mother. Yeah, which is a beautiful piece in the collection. So
I'll just interject. I was waiting for John's question about Diana Rutherford. I spent the evening of her reception there with the portraits, and I have some nice photos of her and the works. It was a wonderful evening. This is Betty Sheldon speaking, Christopher. Nice to meet you.
Thanks, you too.
We painted together that one weekend and sat and visited together in the Masonic Temple in De Smet. That was fabulous. Just really glad she came. I think it was wonderful for her too to be here. And
I know it meant a lot to her. Yeah.
Yeah.
wonderful.
Her and her dog in the camper, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I came on that show was actually up. So John curated it, and then I came on staff while it was on display. So I got to meet her, towards the end of the show. So neat. Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad that this connected all of us. Well, are there any kind of wrapping up here? Any questions? I really want to thank you three for your time, and I'm so glad that could get you all in one box anyway, not one room. But
right.
I have one more thing to add. I see your last question was, John, was there an exhibit that you never got to do at the museum?
Yes, yes.
And it was the wall drug exhibit.
The what exhibit?
The wall drug.
Oh yeah.
All the
that would be a cool.
How many? Do you know how many pieces they have out there?
I can't tell you right now, but they have quite a few, and they have quite a few students. Yeah. And I really did try. I said, wouldn't it be great to, in the wintertime, to bring wall drug to East River? And they didn't buy it, so they didn't want to move them off the wall there in the dining rooms.
Yeah, that's a hot tip. You want to see some great art, visit Wall Drug too.
Yep.
Yes.
You can't miss it. There's a lot of signs directing you there. So.
Or you can always come see us.
Yes.
Are you open to the public, Elizabeth?
No. Only if I like you.
Yeah, you have to twist Elizabeth's arm to make that happen.
You have to bring me lots of really good chocolate.
There you go.
Can do
Now you
that.
know the secret tip.
Yeah.
I have one last comment. It's really nice to hear English spoken properly.
Well, this is Donna, and I just want to again say thank you to our very special guest, Elizabeth, for zooming in, and to John, who is a constant help and volunteer and still contributes. And then, of course, our excellent staff, Taylor and Jodi, who are on camera, as well as tech help by Abby and Carolyn, and always being a great hostess, Pam. Thank you so much for that. And give a big thank you also to our special kind of guest, Betty Sarang and her husband, Evan, and then also John, Holly, and Christopher O'Connell. Thank you so much for being with us tonight and helping kind of round out that picture for all of us of Harvey Dunn. We've had a wonderful time, and I think that everyone here that I can see has really enjoyed it, and I know our Zoomers have too. So thank you all so much for a fantastic program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.